In 1999, two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, decided to investigate a curious phenomenon. Why do completely unprepared people speak with such confidence, while the truly competent live in doubt? What they discovered was disturbing. Incompetence doesn't just prevent someone from doing something well, it also blinds the person to their own failure. In other words, those who don't know also don't know that they don't know. This happens because the same cognitive skills necessary to execute a task well are the ones that allow you to evaluate your own performance. To recognize an error, you need to understand enough to see it. And this is exactly where the Dunning-Kruger effect installs itself. While the ignorant person thinks they're a genius, the wise person questions themselves. And it's in this contrast that the modern world constructs its illusion of wisdom. But here's what mainstream psychology doesn't reveal. This isn't just a cognitive bias. In quantum terms, this is a fundamental collapse of metacognitive coherence. Let me explain. In quantum mechanics, there's a principle called the observer observing the observer. To measure a system accurately, you need instruments more sophisticated than the system itself. A thermometer can measure temperature because it operates on principles beyond simple heat. A microscope can see cells because it transcends cellular scale. But what happens when the observer and the observed are the same? Quantum uncertainty, measurement collapse, distortion. This is precisely what happens in the Dunning-Kruger effect. You're trying to measure your own competence, using the very competence you're trying to measure. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, like trying to lift yourself by pulling your own hair. The measurement instrument is inadequate for the measurement. We live in an era where having an opinion became a sport, and ignorance became spectacle. People who barely comprehend a subject speak with the same conviction as those who dedicated years to research. And the less they know, the more certain they are. The more they affirm, the more they feel they own the truth. Meanwhile, those who truly understand hesitate, question, and often stay silent. The result is a world where confidence doesn't arise from knowledge, but from illusion, where the volume of the voice matters more than the weight of ideas. But this isn't just a curiosity of psychology. It's a mirror of our society, a culture that rewards those who speak loudly and ignores those who think deeply, an era where stupidity disguises itself as confidence, and true intelligence is confused with doubt. Today, we'll understand why stupid people think they're intelligent, and why this dangerous and seductive illusion is shaping the world we live in. But more than that, we'll explore the quantum mechanics of consciousness that creates this effect. We'll discover why your brain's wave function collapses into false certainty, why metacognitive coherence breaks down, and how true wisdom requires quantum superposition of knowing and not knowing simultaneously. Because in quantum terms, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just ignorance. It's the collapse of consciousness into a single, limited eigenstate when infinite possibility was available. The quantum psychology of stupidity awaits. Have you noticed how today everyone seems to know everything about politics, health, economy, technology, behavior, philosophy? Just one news article, one short video, one post on the feed, and boom. Another expert is born. We live in the era of instant certainty. People don't research, they opine, they don't study, they affirm. And the less they comprehend, the more convinced they seem. But this isn't just a cultural problem, it's a real psychological phenomenon, studied and proven by science. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger at Cornell University decided to investigate a curious question. Why do completely unprepared people speak with such confidence, while the truly competent live in doubt? They had groups of volunteers perform tests in logic, grammar, and reasoning. Then they asked participants to evaluate their own performance. The result was shocking. The worst participants believed they had done very well, while the best underestimated themselves. In numbers, the least competent group thought they were good. They believed they were among the top 40%, actually in the 62nd percentile, but in reality, they were among the bottom 10%, only in the 12th percentile. They thought they were above average, but they were well below it. Dunning and Kruger discovered something disturbing. Incompetence doesn't just prevent someone from doing something well. It also blinds the person to their own failure. In other words, those who don't know also don't know that they don't know. And this happens for a simple reason. The same cognitive abilities necessary to do something well are the ones that allow you to evaluate your own performance. If you don't understand enough about a subject, you also lack the foundation to perceive how wrong you are. But here's the quantum truth they didn't tell you. This is a failure of what physicists call higher-order observation. In quantum mechanics, you can't accurately measure a system without a reference frame external to that system. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle proves this. The more precisely you measure position, the less you know about momentum. Why? Because measurement requires interaction, and interaction disturbs the system. But what if the measuring instrument is the system itself? Complete measurement collapse. Total uncertainty masked as certainty. This is the quantum essence of Dunning-Kruger. You're using incompetent cognition to measure incompetent cognition. It's like using a broken ruler to measure the brokenness of the ruler. The result? The system reports, "Everything is fine. I'm functioning perfectly." When in reality, it's catastrophically miscalibrated. This is why you see it everywhere. On social media, people confidently opining on complex topics, citing sources they never read, using technical terms without understanding what they mean. And the most curious part? The less the person knows, the more they feel they dominate the subject. This is quantum false coherence. The brain collapses uncertainty into false certainty to protect the ego from the anxiety of not knowing. On the other hand, those who truly study, research, and reflect tend to be more cautious, more humble, more silent. Why? Because they recognize the size of the unknown. They know how much they don't know. Their consciousness exists in quantum superposition, simultaneously knowing and not knowing. Physicist Richard Feynman said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." Exactly this. The illusion of knowing is a form of self-deception. It comforts the ego, gives a sensation of power, but distances us from truth. And this illusion has a cost. It destroys public debate, generates polarization, arrogance, disinformation, because when everyone has certainty, nobody listens anymore. Sociologist Neil Postman warned in the 80s, "We are drowning in information but starving for wisdom." Today, this phrase has never been more true. We live in an ocean of data, tutorials, and opinions, but without mental filters to distinguish what is knowledge and what is merely noise. The problem isn't ignorance, it's confident ignorance, the kind that speaks loudly. That doesn't listen. That transforms doubt into threat. And this is what feeds the world of fragile certainties we inhabit. People who don't know but have certainty, and people who know but are silenced by the noise of arrogance. Philosopher Bertrand Russell summarized this brilliantly. "The problem with the world is that fools are full of certainty, while the wise are full of doubts. The illusion of knowing is dangerous because it gives us the sensation of progress without having actually learned anything. It transforms ignorance into spectacle, and confidence into disguise for emptiness." In the end, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a psychology study, it's a portrait of our time. A mirror revealing how certainty, when it doesn't come from knowledge, can become the most sophisticated form of stupidity. We live in an era where appearing intelligent is more important than being intelligent, where the image of wisdom is worth more than the silent effort of learning. People no longer seek to understand, they want to be seen understanding. This is the culture of appearance, a world where the ego wants applause, not progress. Today, real learning is in crisis, not from lack of information, but because the ego has transformed knowledge into spectacle. Social media is the greatest example of this. According to research published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology, excessive use of these platforms significantly increases social comparison, and the more a person compares themselves, the lower their self-esteem. In other words, the more we live trying to appear successful or intelligent, the less open we are to admitting we still have much to learn. Another recent study, published in Behavioral Sciences, analyzed the impact of this constant comparison on visual platforms. The results showed that the more a person compares themselves with those who seem better, the more anxiety related to appearance grows. And this, incredibly, reduces the capacity for learning and mental adaptation. Why? Because focus stops being on content and becomes on performance, stops being about understanding and becomes about showing. But here's the quantum truth. This is ego-driven wave function collapse. In quantum mechanics, observation determines outcome. What you focus on becomes your reality. When your consciousness focuses on how do I appear instead of what am I learning, your quantum field collapses into appearance reality instead of growth reality. It's the ego whispering, don't ask questions, pretend you already know. Don't make mistakes or they'll judge you. Don't learn slowly or you'll seem stupid. And so, without realizing it, the ego sabotages the natural process of learning. Because learning requires vulnerability, admitting ignorance, making mistakes, redoing, trying again. But the culture of appearance doesn't allow this. It demands perfection, it demands posture, it demands certainties, even if false. A study from University College London showed something curious. People with greater intellectual humility, those who recognize the limits of their own knowledge, learn faster. They're more open to new ideas, and they manage to evolve with more consistency. But what does the ego do? It erases this humility. It doesn't want to learn, it wants to win. Think about the work environment. How many times have you seen someone pretend they know something just to avoid embarrassment? Or how many times has someone preferred to defend an opinion to the end, even when wrong, just to avoid admitting they didn't know? This isn't strength. It's fear disguised as confidence, and this fear is the poison that prevents learning. Sociologist Erich Fromm said, "The need for approval is one of the most subtle forms of slavery." And this is exactly what we see today. Thousands of people trapped in a role, appearing knowledgeable, well-informed, superior, but inside, insecure, fragile, incapable of questioning their own thinking. In quantum terms, this is surface coherence masking deep decoherence. The external wave function appears organized, but the internal quantum field is chaotic, fragmented, unstable. The culture of appearance doesn't want students, it wants actors, and the ego is the scriptwriter of this theater. While you pretend to know, time passes, the world changes, but you don't evolve. Why? Because learning only happens when curiosity defeats pride. When the quantum superposition of knowing and not knowing is maintained long enough for genuine understanding to emerge. But the ego collapses this superposition prematurely. It can't tolerate the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the vulnerability of not knowing. So it creates false certainty, confident ignorance, the Dunning-Kruger collapse. In the end, the ego prevents learning because it can't bear the sensation of being wrong. But it's precisely error that opens the door to wisdom. In those who don't learn to err, will never learn to grow. The quantum path to true intelligence requires one thing above all: the courage to exist in superposition, to simultaneously know and not know, to be competent and humble, to speak and listen. This is the quantum state the ego fears most, because in superposition it loses control. True wisdom doesn't reside in certainty. It's born from consciousness of one's own limits. While the ignorant person speaks with arrogance, the wise observe in silence. Not from fear, but because they recognize the size of the unknown. Research from Cornell University and the University of London showed curious data. The greater the level of real knowledge, the greater also the tendency to underestimate one's own abilities. In other words, competent people doubt themselves more, not from insecurity, but because they understand how much there still is to learn. This is the inverse effect of Dunning-Kruger. Elevated metacognition, the capacity to see one's own thinking, brings humility. It's what philosopher Socrates said more than 2,000 years ago. I know that I know nothing. This phrase, often trivialized, is one of the most profound declarations ever made. It's not a confession of ignorance, it's a recognition of lucidity. Because only those who think with depth perceive how infinite knowledge is. Neuroscientist David Dunning, one of the creators of the famous study, summarized this in an interview. The problem isn't ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. He explains that as we learn, the mind expands the map of what exists. And with this, the perception of what's still blank also grows. The more we know, the vaster the territory of the unknown seems. And there's data that proves this. Researchers from the University of California at Berkeley found that people with greater intellectual humility, those who admit doubts, who listen before responding, who change their minds before new evidence, have greater performance in solving complex problems and better emotional adaptation. In simple terms, those who accept not knowing learn faster, and those who pretend to know get stuck in their own ego. This is why, paradoxically, wisdom doesn't bring vanity, it brings serenity. The true sage doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to win arguments, doesn't need the last word. They understand that the world doesn't fit into small certainties, and that silence sometimes explains more than 1,000 arguments. Musica, silencio eloquente, sabiduria callada. But here's the quantum secret. True wisdom exists in superposition. In quantum mechanics, a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measurement collapses it into one. The wise mind operates similarly. It holds multiple perspectives simultaneously. It can see from many angles. It exists in cognitive superposition. I might be right and I might be wrong coexist without contradiction. This is quantum cognitive coherence. In contrast, false wisdom, the kind the ego fabricates, transforms doubt into threat. It's the mind that needs to always be right, even if the cost is truth. And the more someone tries to appear intelligent, the more they distance themselves from real intelligence, which is flexible, curious, open. Psychologist Igor Grossman from the University of Waterloo studied this type of practical wisdom. He discovered it's not linked to IQ, but to the capacity to deal with uncertainties, to listen to opposite perspectives, and to change one's mind with dignity. He calls this reasoning wisdom, thinking not to win but to comprehend. And this is perhaps the greatest sign of mental maturity, realizing that not knowing everything isn't weakness, it's what keeps us human, and that each new discovery opens more questions than answers. In quantum terms, wisdom is maintaining superposition for as long as possible before allowing measurement to collapse possibility into certainty. The fool collapses immediately. I know the answer. The wise person maintains superposition. There might be multiple answers. Let me observe longer before concluding. This cognitive patience, this quantum tolerance for uncertainty, is the signature of true intelligence. In the end, real intelligence is a paradox. It grows as it learns to say, I don't know, because only those who recognize their own limit are capable of transcending it. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows us the danger of premature collapse, of false certainty, of ego-driven knowing. But the inverse, the Socratic superposition, shows us the power of maintained uncertainty, of wisdom that knows it doesn't know, of intelligence humble enough to remain curious. This is the quantum state where genius lives, not in certainty, but in the courageous exploration of uncertainty. Not in knowing, but in the art of learning. So where does this leave us? Posa longa. We've explored the quantum mechanics of stupidity, the collapse of metacognitive coherence, the ego's desperate grasping at false certainty. But what's the way forward? The answer lies in what ancient wisdom and quantum physics both point toward, the transcendence of knowing through not knowing. Let me explain what this means practically. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows us that incompetence creates blindness. The measuring instrument is inadequate but the solution isn't to acquire more knowledge, at least not directly. The solution is to develop what quantum physicists call observer independence. what psychologists call metacognition, what ancient wisdom traditions call witnessing consciousness. This is the capacity to observe your own observation, to think about your own thinking, to know about your own knowing. In practical terms, this means asking constantly, how do I know what I think I know? What are my blind spots? What am I assuming? Where might I be wrong? This isn't self-doubt, it's self-awareness. It's creating an external reference frame from which to measure your internal state. Like stepping outside your house to see its true size. Like using a mirror to see your own face. Research shows that people who regularly practice metacognitive reflection, journaling, meditation, contemplative thinking, develop greater accuracy in self-assessment. They escape the Dunning-Kruger trap not by knowing more, but by seeing more clearly what they don't know. This is quantum superposition of consciousness, simultaneously being the thinker and the observer of thinking. The participant and the witness. In meditation traditions, this is called pure awareness. The consciousness that observes all states without collapsing into identification with any single state. When you develop this, something remarkable happens. The ego's grip loosens, because the ego requires identification. I am this. I know this. I'm right about this. But witnessing consciousness says, there are thoughts here, there are beliefs here, there are opinions here, but I am the space in which they arise. This creates what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, what quantum physicists might call maintaining superposition. You can hold multiple contradictory ideas simultaneously without collapsing into certainty about any of them. This might be true and that might be true. I'm exploring, I'm learning. I don't need to conclude prematurely. This is the antidote to Dunning-Kruger. Not more knowledge, but better self-knowledge. Not more certainty, but comfortable uncertainty. The ancient Greek aphorism, know thyself, wasn't about accumulating information about yourself. It was about developing the capacity to observe yourself observing, to create internal distance, to witness your own consciousness in action. And when you do this, you naturally become humble. Not from insecurity, but from clarity. You see how vast the unknown is, how limited any single perspective, how provisional all conclusions. This is what separates the fool from the sage, not knowledge, but relationship to knowledge. The fool, I know. The sage, I'm learning. The fool collapses the wave function immediately into certainty. The sage maintains superposition, comfortable in the exploration of possibility. So here's the practical path forward. 1. Practice metacognitive reflection daily. Journal, meditate. Ask yourself, what did I assume today? Where was I certain? Where might I have been wrong? 2. Seek feedback from those more competent than you. External observation calibrates internal measurement. 3. Embrace the discomfort of not knowing. Train yourself to say, I don't know without shame. This is strength, not weakness. 4. Study epistemology. How we know what we know. This creates meta-level awareness of the knowing process itself. 5. Surround yourself with people who question you, challenge you, show you your blind spots. Not to diminish you, but to expand you. These practices develop what quantum consciousness researchers call coherent metacognition. The ability to maintain awareness of awareness, to observe without collapsing, to know without grasping. And when you develop this, you transcend the Dunning-Kruger effect entirely. Not because you become omniscient, but because you become accurately aware of the boundaries of your knowledge. You know what you know what you don't know, and you know that you don't know what you don't know. This triple awareness is the signature of wisdom. And ironically, it makes you more confident, not less, in your actual areas of competence, because your confidence is calibrated, accurate, based on reality rather than illusion. So the hidden truth is this. Stupid people think they're geniuses because they lack the metacognitive coherence to measure their own incompetence. Their consciousness has collapsed into false certainty to protect the ego from the anxiety of not knowing. But wise people maintain quantum superposition. They exist comfortably in the space between knowing and not knowing. And from this space, true learning becomes possible. The question isn't, am I smart or stupid? The question is, am I aware of the limits of my awareness? Because that awareness, that metacognitive quantum coherence, is what separates confident ignorance from humble wisdom. It's what allows you to escape the Dunning-Kruger trap and enter the infinite field of genuine understanding. So I leave you with this. What are you certain about that you might be? Where in your life have you collapsed the wave function prematurely into false knowing? And what would happen if you allowed yourself to exist in superposition, to not know with dignity, to learn with humility? The quantum field of consciousness awaits your honest observation.